This episode of Android Authority is brought to you by Norton Security. Hey, what is going on, guys? Lon here from Android Authority, and the Sony Xperia Z3 is Sony's latest flagship, and it has come to the United States for anyone on Verizon as the Xperia Z3v. But is it better? Is it worse? Well, that's what we're here to find out with the Sony Xperia Z3v. Usually when Verizon picks up a flagship phone, they're known for altering the design of the phone in one way or another, and they've done the same thing here with the Xperia Z3v. The front and back are still solid pieces of glass, but gone are the all-metal curved frame and sides from the original Z3. Instead, the frame is plastic with metal inserts, and they are now flat, which makes it more reminiscent of the Xperia Z2 and other previous Sony devices, and not so much like the Z3. Verizon's change on the design feels like a step backwards, but I guess if you prefer the flat sides, then you might look at it as a good thing. It's a little bit thicker and heavier than the Z3, but not by much, and it's still pretty thin at 8.9mm, and overall it has the same build quality that you would expect from Sony. Other than the flat sides, everything else about the hardware has remained intact. It's IP68, so it's dust and water resistant, and you still get front-facing stereo speakers, which makes Sony one of the few OEMs that can give HTC's own boom sound speakers a run for its money when it comes to audio quality. You still get the same 5.2-inch 1080p display on the front with Sony's Triluminous technology, and even though 2K displays are starting to become a new standard on smartphones, the 1080p panel on the Z3v is no slouch. It's very sharp, bright, beautiful, and vivid with great viewing angles, so unless you absolutely have to have a 2K screen, you're not going to find much that's wrong with the Z3v's display. Also, like the Xperia Z3, the Z3v is packing the Snapdragon 801 processor clocked at 2.5 GHz with 3 gigs of RAM. Just like many other flagships powered by the Snapdragon 801, the Z3v will deliver a very fast and responsive experience, and with 3 gigs of RAM on board, switching back and forth between apps and multitasking will be a much more seamless experience. While it's a step behind the Snapdragon 805, the Snapdragon 801 will still provide more than enough power and performance for even the most demanding users. There's also no surprises here when it comes to the camera. The 20.7 megapixel sensor makes its return on the Z3v, and the software, as you would expect, remains unchanged. Sony's camera app is packed with a ton of features. Some are useful and some are sort of just for fun, but with all the different levels of control that Sony's camera UI provides, this will satisfy both the casual and the serious smartphone photographer. The only quirk with the camera, and this isn't specific to just the Xperia Z3v, but Sony phones in general, is the fact that you can only take advantage of all 20.7 megapixels in manual mode, which also limits you to shooting in a 4:3 aspect ratio. One minor difference with the camera on the Z3v is the ISO caps out at 6400, which is a step less than what the Z3 is capable of, but with an aperture of f2.0, you're still going to be able to capture some decent looking low light shots with a minimal amount of noise. Other than that, you can expect pretty much the same level of picture quality with very sharp and detailed images with a great amount of color. So I mentioned a little bit earlier that the Z3v is actually a little bit thicker than the Z3, and this is for a couple of reasons. One is the battery. So it's a 3200 mAh battery versus the 3100 mAh battery in the Z3. So it's slightly larger, but you probably won't notice too much of a difference in battery life between the two. One thing is for sure though, is that the Z3v will easily get you through a full day on a single charge, and possibly even into the better part of a second day depending on your usage. Reason number 2 is wireless charging. So the Z3v has Qi wireless charging built in, so it's compatible with any Qi wireless charger. So this is a definite plus if you enjoy the benefits of wireless charging. Taking a look at the software, the experience is practically the same as many other Sony phones. You're looking at Android 4.4 KitKat with Sony's Xperia UI, and just as a side note, the Easter egg actually shows a 2 instead of a 3, so it kind of makes you wonder if this was really supposed to be a Z2 variant and they maybe just slapped on the Z3 name at the last minute. Either way, the Xperia UI, if you don't already know, preserves a somewhat stock look and feel of Android, which is great because it keeps things relatively lightweight and fast. There are a few customizations from Sony built in, like the small apps in the recent apps menu that give you some extra multitasking capabilities, and you also get an entire suite of Sony applications like Walkman, Movies, and PlayStation Mobile for integrating your Xperia phone to your PlayStation console. Since this is a Verizon phone, there's also no shortage of Verizon bloatware pre-installed, so on top of dealing with Sony's own apps, you're going to have to put up with Verizon's, which really takes away from what would otherwise be a very clean Android experience. You can pick up the Xperia Z3v right now on Verizon for $200 on a 2-year contract, or $600 if you want to buy the phone outright. And if you're looking for that Sony flagship experience on Verizon, the Xperia Z3v is going to be your best bet. And there you have it for the Sony Xperia Z3v. Sony's flagship has finally hit another carrier in the United States on Verizon, and even though the Z3v is an extremely solid smartphone in its own right, it feels a little bit more like a beefed up Z2 than it does a Z3. But with that being said, it's almost just as good as the original. Anyways guys, hopefully you enjoyed this review. If you did, please give it a thumbs up down below. We definitely appreciate that. And also subscribe to the channel, which is also down below if you haven't already. And once you're done with all of that, check out our website at androidauthority.com for more in-depth coverage, because we are your source for all things Android. This episode of Android Authority was brought to you by Norton Security.